So how do you choose your text for the sermon? My definition of preaching is expository exaltation. And that word expository means that the sermon is always manifestly trying to bring meaning, the meaning of the author and God, the reality, out of the text. So we have to have scripture. But I don't want to imply by that you have to have only one text. How many texts you have, how many parts of the Bible you quote in one sermon is not of the essence in defining expository. What expository means is all the points you make in your sermon are going to be manifestly evident to your people as coming from the words of the Bible, rightly so interpreted. They're going to see in the text, if you have 5 texts to build your sermon around, they're going to see all those texts with such clarity that when you draw truth out of it, they're nodding their head and saying, yep, that's in the text there. I see where he's getting that. So in choosing texts to be expositional, don't hear me saying, got to have one text, which means, by the way, I do believe in the legitimacy of topical sermons. By that I mean a sermon on hope, series on hope, series on heaven, a sermon on marriage, sermon on election, and a sermon on predestination, sermon on government and faith. I believe in topical messages, but what I don't believe in is filling up those messages with your ideas. You fill up those messages with passages of Scripture rightly explained and woven together in a clear pattern so that people can see, yep, those points are coming from the Bible. Now, having said that, I do think that as a general rule, you would do well as a preacher to have one main text for a sermon. I say in general. And the reason I say that in general is your people will have the sense our feet are on firmer ground here if our pastor lingers a long time explaining the flow of one text than if he's jumping around more briefly saying, this is what that text means and this is what this text means. They might see it, but their confidence level that we're getting a careful reading of those texts is not as high as if you linger over a text and show them in its wider connections here how the text actually makes the points that you are getting. So I do think it's a good thing to have one text usually while you draw in other parts of Scripture for elucidation and confirmation of what you're seeing there. How long should a text be for a sermon? Like a chapter long, a half a verse, a paragraph, a book? There is value, isn't there, in both short texts that you really wring out everything that's there, and long texts where you help your people get the big picture and the overview of a chapter or a book. Just by way of illustration, I think I preached 6 sermons on Romans 1, 16 and 17. So 6 sermons on 2 verses. And when I was done with Romans, I think it was like 252 sermons or something like that on these 16 chapters. So we really went slow, deep, and thorough in Romans. However, I did a series one year on the minor prophets in the Old Testament. There's 12 of them, and I preached one sermon on the whole book. That was one of the hardest series I ever did because I had to do so much work to find out what's the one main thing that this prophet is trying to get across and how my people profit the other prophet from it. So that was one. Or I did, I think, 5 sermons on Job. Job has 42 chapters. And I did 5 messages on 42 chapters. So I really believe in the value of both very rigorous, detailed attention to smaller units of Scripture, and I believe in the value of giving the big picture over whole books or whole chapters more quickly than taking a year or 8 years on them like I did on Romans. But how do you choose what texts, or what topics for that matter? Here are the questions that I think it's helpful to ask in answering that question. First, pray. Say, Lord, I really want to help these people. I want to strengthen them. What do they need? Help me, show me what would be the most helpful thing for our people at this time. And then ask these questions. Number 1, what is burning in you? I don't think it will work to try to preach on something that God hasn't grabbed you by. What is burning in you? Second question, what do my people need? What's going on in the church? What do they need at this time? Third question, what aspects of the whole counsel of God have I not addressed yet in my ministry here? Because according to Acts 20, Paul felt like he was free to step away from the elders without their blood being on his hands because he had delivered to them the whole counsel of God. What aspects of the whole counsel of God have I not addressed? Next question, what's going on in the world? Don't preach with your head in the sand. I've been dismayed sometimes over the years visiting churches around that everybody in the culture is talking about some crisis or some calamity or some issue, and this service happened and this sermon happened as though nobody was talking about it. I think we should always be alert, either in the way we preach or the way we welcome to people to worship or the very sermon we choose, the text we choose, by what is going on. I remember when the Oakland earthquake happened, I forget, in the 90s, somewhere where the bridge fell flat and buried a lot of cars and everybody was talking. I switched my text and took it from Hebrews. How grateful we are to have a kingdom that cannot be shaken, because I knew everybody in the church was completely consumed with the media attention to this horrific earthquake in our culture. So what's going on in the world is a key question to what shall I preach on this Sunday, or what series shall I preach, or what topic shall I tackle? Last question. What do your elders think? When I finished 8 years on Romans, I thought, okay, now what? And I had a huge trust in the eldership in those days, and I went to them and I said, I'd like to poll you. I want you to write down, secret kind of ballot. I want you to write down what you think I should tackle next. Topic, book, you name it. I'll collect them all together and see what God says to us through that. And interestingly enough, they said, how about choosing one of these 3? I mean, that was the way I summed it up. Marriage series, Gospel of John, Book of Genesis. And that's the way I ended my ministry. I did a series on marriage, and then I began to preach through John and got through chapter 14. So I would say it's really important that along the way, as you feel your elders have matured to counsel you in this way, take them into account and see what they think the church needs. Finally, I would recommend that the staple of your preaching over the years be working through books. Just going verse by verse, taking a verse at a time, or a paragraph at a time, or a chapter at a time, but the staple of your preaching be working through books mingled with seasonal breaks and topical breaks as you discern the church needs. And here are the reasons for why I think making that the bread and butter of your preaching life is wise. Number one, it really does lift a burden off of you and makes things easier in a sense, because you don't have to decide every week, what are my texts going to be? What am I going to preach on? It's set for you right there. It does lift a huge burden, but secondly, it adds a burden. It does, because this is good. It means you're going to have to tackle issues you would not otherwise tackle. You can't skip a text without telling your people, I'm skipping the text because I don't know what it means, which is okay if you don't know what it means, but you don't have the luxury of just jumping around. So that's the second reason. It's a good thing to be forced to deal with tough issues because they come next in the text. And third, it communicates to your people almost like nothing else. This book is inspired. This book is inspired. Because all of it is profitable. And so you're going to show them that you believe it's all profitable because it's inspired by taking it a text at a time and skipping nothing. And the fourth reason it's valuable is because it keeps you from riding hobby horses. And it helps protect your people from thinking he just rides his own hobby horse all the time, when in fact, no, you don't. You take the texts as they come because you think the whole counsel of God is important for this people. And the last reason I think it's good to have the bread and butter be working through books is because it helps your people get the framework of a book, the framework of a big chunk of Scripture. It gets rock under their feet, firm to stand on when you work with them through lengthy passages of Scripture. But when all is said and done in choosing texts, the bottom line is, do you, whether it's one text or several texts, whether it's a long text or a short text, whether it's a different text every week or working through one book, get meaning, reality from the text manifestly. Let your people see that all your points come from biblical words.